Good morning and half a day. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Catherine Castro and with the Guam Chamber of Commerce. We are pleased to partner today with the Guam Economic Development Authority and Guam's Department of Labor to bring information to you about government incentive programs for businesses, specifically programs administered by GEDA and by Guam DOL. Speaking today are Melanie Mendiola, Chief Executive Officer and Administrator for the Guam Economic Development Authority. And from the Department of Labor, we have Marie Lizama, Business Services Unit Representative, Teresa Camacho, Employment Program Administrator for WIOA, WP, and JBSG programs, and Phyllis Tapasnia, Program Coordinator for the State Apprenticeship Agency. This session is being recorded and will be available for viewing again soon after the event is completed. All participants are on mute, and we encourage you to send questions during the presentation via the question feature on the panel located on the right side of your screen. We will be sure to address your questions during the Q&A session after the formal presentation. I would like to now introduce you to Mel Mendiola, who will begin the presentation. Mel? Good morning.
Half a day and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. Okay, so since this is a webinar, we are going to cut straight to the chase here, and we won't, Maria and I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about our agencies and all the things we do, our mission statement, etc. We're just going to go straight into what we're here to talk about today, which is government incentives for private businesses. But before we did that, I did want to kind of set us all up for kind of the expectations for today. So our agenda is, our first discussion point will be how our economy is measured. How do our initiatives build Guam's economy? And so you guys can have know what lens we're looking at this through. You can look, we'll give you a look at standing GEDA and GDOL programs. So these programs have nothing to do with pandemic conditions or COVID-19. These are programs that have been in play in our two agencies and will continue to be in the future. We'll also talk about the current state of the economy and the effects of the pandemic and our governor's response, collective response with our agencies in addressing business issues as a result of COVID-19. So for the next slide. So I'd spent a little bit of time, or in the past, I've done a gig here and there, adjuncting at the University of Guam in economics, BA 110. And in BA 110, one of my favorite parts of the semester is when I get to talk about a productive economy. And one of the best ways to measure a productive economy, now there are critics out there who say GDP doesn't measure stuff like happiness, but here at GEDA, we're not overly concerned with happiness. We are concerned with productivity of our economy. So I really like GDP. And so if we can go to the next slide, as far as GDP, what does GDP measure? Gross domestic product. Gross domestic product takes into account a number of different measurements: consumption, investments, government expenditures, and net exports. Now, just to break this down, how do we measure consumption in Guam? One of the proxies to measure consumption in Guam is the BPT. So we say, are people spending their money? Did they take their stimulus checks, or prior to the pandemic, their tax refunds? What are they doing with it? Are they going and buying stuff, flat screen TVs, stand-up paddleboards, etc.? All of that is measured by consumption, or consumption is measured oftentimes by things like the BPT. So we know if our economy is growing because people are spending their money. Investment, when we talk about investment, we're talking about private investment flowing into Guam. So an example of private investment is the investment of the construction of, say, the Subaki Tower. This was external money coming into our island to fund construction projects, jobs, etc. Government expenditures. So when governments, back after, I believe it was the housing crisis, you had the ARA funds, right? American Rescue Revitalization Act. So those were funds to redo highways and infrastructure and things like that. And that was a way that a previous administration of the federal government wanted to build our economy through government expenditure. And then lastly, net exports. Now, a lot of times when my students would think about exports, they think about objects, right? exports like Denancy. Guam doesn't have really a large share of exports when it comes to products, but we do have a large share of exports when it comes to services, and that's specifically tourism. So all the consumption that happens on our island by local residents is counted under consumption, whereas all the consumption that occurs by our visitors is counted as a net export. So if a visitor from Korea comes to Guam and goes golfing, and then Manila Golf Course pays their BPT, then that then goes to towards measuring our net exports. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So in building our economy, so all these local initiatives that GEDA and GDOL try to build have to do with building the economy. Many ways to do that: diversifying the workforce. Why do we want to diversify the workforce? Because when you have a diverse workforce, then the odds of having a pool of unemployed individuals is lower, right? You have a pool of unemployed individuals, meaning people have maintained their earning power, and with their earning power, they're going out and continuing to consume, right? New industries, new jobs, and new businesses. New industries bring in investment, they bring in government expenditures, they bring in exports, all of those different, they affect all those different components of GDP. And of course, increasing business resiliency. For many of your businesses that you represent today, many of you serve the military market, or many of you serve the tourism market. If you have a wider pool of customers, because Guam had many different industries, then that would help increase your business's resiliency. Okay, and so that is something that this is why a lot of the initiatives that we have to do with any of these three things: diversifying the workforce, new industries, or increasing your business resiliency. If you read the literature across the United States during the COVID-19 pandemic, economies who held up the best oftentimes were economies that had multiple industries represented within their state or local economy. It wasn't just tourism, it wasn't just tech, or something along those lines. It might have been multiple industries: tech, pharma, tourism, medical, healthcare, whatever. All right. So moving on to some of GEDA's some of the standing programs offered by GEDA and GDOL. Today we're going to talk about three. One of them is our qualifying certificate program. And then I'll talk about GEDA loans and grants. And then I'll turn it over to Marie and team to talk about GDOL's workforce development programs. Again, all of these programs have been in existence. They have been in existence despite, prior to, during, and will continue to exist post-pandemic. One thing that the pandemic has done, however, is it sometimes expands the ability to use or flexibility for the loans and the grants, as well as the workforce development. And then after we talk about this, later on in the presentation, we'll go on and talk a little bit about more COVID-specific programs. All right, so first, our qualifying certificate program. So qualifying certificate programs, and we can go to the next slide. The qualifying certificate, this was probably the first major program created by the Guam Economic Development Authority. The qualifying certificate grants tax benefits based on eligible investment commitment. You must create new employment. You must expand the base of the island's economy through business activities deemed to be of value to the island of Guam. So some of the first recipients of qualifying certificates back in the 70s and 80s were hotels down in Tumon. Okay, what do we mean by tax benefits? Depending on the type of the qualifying certificate, we have qualifying certificates that allow for BPT abatement. Okay, abatement means your BPT bill is reduced. We also have QCs that allow for income tax rebate, meaning you front your income taxes and it is then rebated to you. And we also have, we have QCs that offer BPT abatement, income tax rebates, and use tax abatement, use tax abatement as well. And so those types of, it depends on the qualifying certificate and the degree of investment of the company. I'd love to talk about this in a one-size-fits-all model and say, you have to have a minimum investment of $1 million. You have to have, but that's just not how it is. Okay, it depends on the eligible activity. And as you can see on the slide, we've listed some of the eligible activities. We've listed some of the eligible activities in this list. Okay. One of the ones I wanted to pull out here is circular economy and recycling. So I want to say once upon a time, 1998-ish or so, this was created so that companies could get tax abatements to move large amounts of waste off of our island. So to take tons and tons of aluminum, thousands of square feet of cubic yards of aluminum, and move them on a boat off of Guam over to Asia. Okay. What we found was that since 1998, there was not a single applicant to this circular economy or to this recycling QC. So in this administration, we said, why don't we try to make this a little bit more user-friendly, a little more useful to the island of Guam? So we went to the legislature, and Senator Clint Rigel, our oversight chair, sponsored a circular economy and recycling qualifying certificate. It was an amendment to the original legislation. So what the qualifying certificate allows for is a company presents to us their plan for moving a meaningful amount of waste materials, turning it into something else. So removing waste from the waste stream to turn it into something else. So an example could be removing all the tires from Guam and turning it into construction inputs for roads. Okay. Another example could be taking all the clothing waste from Guam and turning it into recycled textiles, something along those lines. So removing a meaningful amount of waste, and when we say meaningful, we don't mean X tons or cubic yards. What we mean is you will consult a committee, and the committee says, we think that Guam produces this amount of plastic bottles or whatever material. This would be a meaningful goal as far as making a dent in the waste stream. You can qualify for up to 100% of income tax rebate, BPT abatement, and use tax abatement as well. Meaning if you land equipment in Guam to use for your business, you don't have to pay some kind of import tariff or something along those lines. Okay. Now, when it comes to the circular economy QC, this is something that I believe it was passed in December. The amendment to the recycling QC was passed in December. We already have one company who submitted a letter of intent to apply for this qualifying certificate. And that actually brings me to the steps for applying. So what a company would do is they would go to our website and check out our fact sheet about this particular industry and look at what abatements or rebates are available. Not all of these industries have all of these abatements, and not all of these, some just have BPT abatement, some just have an income tax rebate, some just have, so you want to kind of take a look and make sure, it's worth your time and effort, because there is effort put into the application. It's like going to the bank and applying for a loan. You provide us with your business plan, you provide us with your financials, with projections, and all of that. As far as the review process, it goes through an internal review, then a public meeting, and then discussion and passage by the recommendation for benefit by the board. And then it goes to the governor, office of the governor, and then it goes back to you. Okay, this is what the contract specifies. Again, this is not a one size fits all. So depending on your financials, depending on your plan, you may not be offered 100%. You may not be offered 100% as far as a rebate or an abatement. You may be offered 90 or 80. And a lot of it just depends on how long the activity is set to be taking place, how much of, back to the circular, how much waste you're looking to remove from the waste stream. But mainly it depends on the size of your investment. We want to make sure that the size of your investment, if your investment is $1 million, we will not likely grant you more than $1 million worth of abatements, rebates, etc. Okay, but we have been in recent years, GEDA has been making efforts to streamline the process, to simplify the application, as well as simplify the annual reporting. Okay, let me see. I'm just going to take a quick look at the chat box. Is healthcare consumption included in the GDP? I believe, as far as I know, healthcare, like clinics and such, they do contribute to the GDP insofar, or they are representative in the BPT measurement because clinics file BPT. Hospitals do not, so hospitals are tracked else. Hospitals would be tracked. I'm not sure if there's a measure. I believe that when the BEA tracks our GDP, it probably use both, but I know for sure BPT will track like clinics, private clinics and private providers, pharmacies, etc. Anyone subject to BPT, but like hospitals, for example, are not. So that's so it looks like that's the only question so far. So the qualifying certificate, one of the best ways to find out about the QC, and so one of the best, does a renewable large energy investment projects fall under pursuit? Yes, renewable investment does fall under green technology. All QCs do have an expiration date. QC expirations can, again, QC expiration is largely dependent on the size of your contribution, the size of your investment into our local economy and how that's measured and how that is projected out over the next few years. Okay. I think that is about it for now for the qualifying certificate. The best way to find out more information about our qualifying for certificate is start with our website, www.investguam.com. Okay, check out our QC info there, but set up a meeting with our business development team led by Mr. Ed Camacho, as well as our assistant manager there, Mr. Matt Baza, and or myself. You can also get in touch with myself so we can talk to you a little bit more. As you can see, there's a number of different, and there's even a general, if your QC, if your business idea does not fall into any of these eligible activities, you can talk to us about a general QC, service, the general services QC. You see the services right here on the list. And so the best thing to do is just keep in touch, talk to us about what your idea is. Of course, it's all confidential, and then we can guide you through whether or not it sounds like an eligible activity or not. Okay, opening up, and remember, a qualifying certificate is to promote new industries. Okay, so if something is not new, if something is relatively mature, an example I'd use is opening up a restaurant. Okay, opening up a restaurant is not a new industry. Okay, having said that, opening up a restaurant that has special qualities about it, that could very well be something that can qualify. We're open, you know, and GEDA's job is to help to get you through the process. The approving bodies of the QC are our board here at GEDA, as well as the Office of the Governor. Slaughterhouse, yes, falls under agricultural QC. All right, next slide. Although a slaughterhouse, you know, I do want to make just a quick special note about ag QCs. Agriculture, you're already not subject to BPT under the farm exemption. And so given that an agricultural QC makes a difference if you're trying to scale an ag business and you anticipate having significant tax issues in your income tax or use tax because you're landing all this inventory. But if you're strictly looking at it from the perspective of BPT, it's useless for ag because ag, you don't pay BPT as it is. All right, so our loan programs. GEDA has for years extended a variety of different types of loan programs. We have our Ag Development Fund, which is a small loan of about $50,000. It is a line of credit valid for 1 year, but it's subject to review. So that's not to say that after 1 year you have to pay it back. It's after 1 year your credit line is reviewed, just like a regular bank. Our GDFA, we are a lender of last resort, meaning you must have at least one declination from one of our local banks. The maximum loan amount is $1.2 million. And a little bit later, I'll talk about COVID-specific features of these different loan programs. And lastly, our SSBCI. Our current max is $500,000. Our current maximum term is 7 years. And it's dependent, and the interest rate depends on the bank underwriting. We work with several partner banks. Our partner banks include Community First Federal Credit Union, the Bank of Guam, Bank Pacific, And if I can think of any others, I think that's it, right? Those three. Community First, Bank of Guam, Pacific Islands Development Bank is one of our newest. And we continue to enroll new banks in the program if they find the programs useful. So it largely depends. So you should talk to your local bank, but this is SSBCI similar to SBA. We offer a loan guarantee. A loan guarantee is to help, so if you're a higher risk borrower, they may utilize SSBCI as a backup to guarantee your loan. And so this program has been very successful. It's been in operation, I want to say, since 2013, and we're continuing to expand. And actually, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. And then just to talk, before I turn it over to Marie Lizama, just to talk briefly about grants through GEDA. GEDA does not have any standing grant programs for small businesses. All of our grant programs generally have to do with one specific initiative or are grant funded somehow. So for example, GEDA was awarded a state trade and export grant by the SBA. We then used that grant to pass through the monies to businesses that were engaged in export types of activities. So to engage, so they had to go to export classes, they had to go to classes with the SBDC on developing their export plan. They had to present an export plan, so similar to like Shark Tank, where they tell us, this is what I'm going to do, this is how much money I'm going to spend. And then they were eligible for grants of up to $21,000. Our first class cohort graduated yesterday, and they were awarded a total of $109,000 in grants. Up to about 21,000, I think, was the max award. And those grants can be used for various, those grants were used for various items such as product translation, attending a trade show, developing a website or e-commerce platform, etc. So this is not a standing program. Every year we have to apply for a renewal of funding. And so that'll come down the pipeline probably sometime around February of next year with an award time of April. So the best way to stay tuned with this is just stay in touch with us, follow us on social media, etc. Another grant program we launched, and this another grant program we launched had to do with COVID-19. And I'll go ahead and talk about that a little bit later. And then whenever GEDA advertises, we do often, once or twice a year, we do our community contribution qualifying grant program. And this is basically the QCs that we pass out sometimes have a community contribution involved. And those are used for grants to nonprofits. So they're not used for for-profit entities, which is why I didn't talk about, or I'm not talking about it at length today. But if you have friends in the nonprofit world, they should definitely look into our QCCC, Qualifying Certificate Community Contribution Grant Program. And that's one of our only grant programs that is kind of an annual program. Otherwise, everything is grant funded or special program related. Okay. All right. And so now I think is a great time to turn it over to Ms. Marie to talk about GDOL standing programs.
Thank you, Mel. Hi, good morning, everyone. So I am with the Business Services Unit. Basically, what we do is we go out and we connect with all of you, and we try to bridge that gap between the employers, their inventories, and the job seekers. So if we could just go to the slide for DOL. Many of you probably know of our Hire Guam website. The benefits to the website, well, it is the official job bank for the island. Benefits include free, the fact that it is free. You are able to take advantage of many one-stop career and training services. So we are able to set up resume writing, assistance with resumes, assistance basically with getting you trained so that you can get into unsubsidized employment. We also offer labor and market information on the site itself. And the importance really of the site is it tracks outcomes for us. So when we do our reports to the federal government, we are able to prove that we have successfully placed these applicants via or into the programs. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of the job search. The beauty of this particular site is if you are looking for a specific occupation, as a user, you would type in the word, and then of course it'll display as such. And then I think the next slide, job matching. This is another good feature of the program. So what happens is you as an employer are probably inundated with a lot of resumes when you put out a call for positions. So the system can narrow that down. What happens is it is able to match job seekers to the occupations that you are seeking to fill, or the positions you are seeking to fill. So as you can see here, it'll tell you just how qualified, or I'm sorry, the percentage that on the resume, that person's resume to the occupation that you are offering. Next slide, please. WIOA programs. So this is our Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act programs. I'm only going to touch base on two today, one of which is called Work Experience. And this is really a short or part-time activity geared to those who have either never worked or who haven't worked in a long time. So anyone who has possibly had to care for a loved one or is decided to just take some time off and go to school and so forth. This particular activity is geared more toward those types of individuals. We pay the minimum wage and up to a maximum of 480 hours. And you do not, basically it comes from the government of Guam's, we process what we call GG1s for these employees, and so their paycheck comes from the government of Guam. So this is absolutely free to you as an employer. Next slide. The Guam Registered Apprenticeship Program, the eligible businesses are able to get up to 50% of costs incurred in training an apprentice. And that would be 50% applied against your gross receipts tax, or I guess it's called business privilege tax now. And those costs include your wages, your medical and dental insurance, any instructor costs, tuition and books, and any equipment that is required for that particular position. Next slide. So what do our programs do? Our programs, it reduces the shortage of highly skilled workers. In particular, GRAP, the apprenticeship program. And it encourages the hiring and training into certain trades and occupations. And it also means that these apprentices are able to continue to pay income and taxes and therefore participate in the economy. And I should say that, some of you are hesitant probably to use the apprenticeship program, perhaps just because of language such as journeyman and so forth. And we're thinking it's more shipyard related, telecommunications related. And typically, yes, those industries have taken advantage of the apprenticeship program. However, there are other occupations in which the apprenticeship program can be applied. So, I'll give you as an example, it sounds kind of crazy, but I believe an actor is part of that. Puppet making, if you can, if you can believe that. But with that said, of course, the ultimate goal is what jobs are needed out there, or what, and what is there a need, and how can we fill that? And part of that can come from participating in an apprenticeship program. Okay, next slide. Okay, so you would have to be registered with the apprenticeship program under the Department of Labor. And while that next point does say it should be on the listing of apprenticeable occupations, if you have an idea, similar to what Mel has said with her program, if you have an idea and you know that there is something out there that can generate jobs, then contact us, contact Phyllis, and we will look into that and suggest that it become an apprenticeable occupation. And the last thing to note is unfortunately, you cannot be a beneficiary of the qualifying certificate issued by GEDA. Okay, next slide. We do have other programs, one of which is the Senior Community Service Employment Program, which is called CSEP. That is managed by Ms. Dorothy Gutierrez. This is geared toward those in the workforce, or those individuals who are 55 years and over. They must be unemployed and their family income cannot exceed more than 25% or be more than 25% over the federal poverty level. They must also have a significant barrier to employment. For example, English proficiency, and they perhaps were previously incarcerated, or they never finished high school. And so this particular program tries to expose them to work, gives them training, so that in the end, again, the goal is unsubsidized employment. Next slide, please. Okay. That's it for me. Okay, I think we have a question here, though, before we go back to Mel. Okay, no, I think that was for Mel, right? Okay, sorry, I saw film and video production, and that actually is an apprenticeable position, occupation.
Mel, we need you to.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay, am I muted still? Can you hear me? You can hear me, right? Okay, great. So let me see. So before we kind of move on to the current state of the economy and COVID-related programs, to put this all into perspective, as far as when you're planning a new business or a new venture or looking at expanding your existing venture, how do you look at all of these programs and putting them all together? When it comes to investing in your new business, a qualifying certificate is generally good for when you're creating employment, but there's a large amount of investment upfront, construction. So an example would be the Subaki Tower. Subaki Tower is probably getting, they have a significant amount of benefit when it comes to, because of the size of their investment in the construction of the hotel itself. The GRAP program does have benefits that allow for BPT abatement. Having said that, at the hotel, at first, they may not have that many apprenticeable positions. So what one might want to do is, as they're getting their business off the ground, they look into the GEDA grant, the GEDA loan programs, the QC program to mobilize a large amount of equipment, bring it to Guam. And then if the QC program, if they start to really develop internal talent where they need to really build up the skills of their individuals, they can start off with the workforce experience program, because workforce experience is a great place for entry level employees to come in, and then move on to the Guam Registered Apprenticeship Program after their qualifying certificate expires. And the reason for that is not because we want to be mean, GOL and GEDA want to be mean, but it's because a QC oftentimes allows for BPT abatement and the GRAP allows for BPT abatement. And you're not allowed to double up your benefit here, okay? Everything can only be counted once. And so that's one of the best ways to kind of put all of these pieces together. And the only way to put all of these pieces together is to sit down and really look at your plan and figure out what program fits where, and as well as to look at kind of what industries will provide, and you know, from the government side of the house, what industries provide the most benefit to our island as far as growing our economy. So now moving on to the current state of the economy. So back to our economics lesson, consumption. So what has been in the state that we've been in because of the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic, what has contributed to consumption? We have pandemic unemployment. So if people were unemployed, they could go after pandemic unemployment or FPUC. The CARES Act allowed for multiple stimulus types of programs. So people were getting money from Programman, Salapi, and all those other types of programs. When it comes to investment, our investment condition, the investment conditions, I put bipolar because worldwide, you're seeing different things. You're seeing the stock market rally, but at the same time, there's high unemployment in places that depend largely on tourism. You see some industries that are doing not great and some other industries that are doing incredibly well. Here in Guam, one of the things that's proving to be a challenge, and even being bipolar here in Guam, is we have large amounts of military industry investment coming into our island, even in the way of, especially in the way of construction. But those investments into our island, really the effect of H-2B shortages continue to plague us outside of defense-related projects or directly related defense projects. And so because of that, investment conditions are continue to be a little bit difficult. It's hard for investors to come from Asia to Guam up until probably this last few weeks, because they couldn't physically land here without all the quarantine requirements, not necessarily here, but in their home country. Okay. When it came to government expenditures, FEMA flowed in money to us, CARES, and now the American Rescue Plan. And net exports, we all know what's going on with tourism. Tourism numbers were at 10% of where we were last year, tempered only by the movement of the military. Okay. And now we have Airbnb, we all saw, I think there's really this a really strong sense of hope and happiness when we saw these charter, our first charter flight from Taiwan come in yesterday. I think everyone can agree that that was really signs of light around the corner, right? All right. What about GDP and our employment, however? So if we go to the next slide, Guam's employment has grown since 2015. It's grown 8.8% since 2015 and 4.3% since 2018. So this is our employment base is growing and contributing to our GDP through consumption, right? And our labor force has also gone up from 64,880 to 67,730 in 2020. Okay, so this is pre-pandemic. Our unemployment is decreasing slowly. So pre-pandemic, we were at a 6.1%, which is pretty typical. I think something we always tell bond investors is Guam seems to attract 1 or 2 points, 2% higher than the States. So if States is like 4%, Guam's usually about 6. Not too bad. In December of 2020, it was 19.4%, and that's come down to 16.5. And then of course, if you talk to Gary Hiles and the experts over at the Department of Labor, they'll tell you that unemployment is decreasing. However, it's starting to kind of level off. All right, so next slide, please. When GEDA launched its grant program last year, one of the things that we did do was we did gather data from all of our recipients as far as a drop in revenue during the COVID pandemic. And what we said, what we noticed was out of the businesses that participated in the Small Business Pandemic Assistance Grant, during the height of the pandemic, so this was during the lockdown, the first lockdown, which took place in right around March or April, there was businesses experienced a drop in revenue of 74 to 88% as a result of the COVID pandemic in the second quarter of 2020. Of these businesses, GEDA gave out about 2,300 grants, about 1,200 to almost 1,300 businesses at annual revenues of less than $500,000, 864 with $500,000 to 1.5 million, and 144 with over 1.5 in annual revenue. These represented 65% of small businesses on the island and an approximate impact of 54 million on the BPT. As of press time, as of the last time we kind of looked at this in a couple months of FY 2021, 8% of commercial customers were taking 90 plus days to pay their power bill. So we see that the difficulties remain across the board when it comes to paying your rent, paying your bills, and paying your employees and bringing back employees. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in 2020, the governor's response to all of this was, of course, to take advantage of the federal programs such as EIDL and PPP, which many of you did. In addition, GDOL launched their Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, PUA, FPUC. GEDA launched a Small Business Pandemic Assistance Grant, as well as Commercial Rent Relief Grant. To help our landlords out, there was the Residential Rent Relief Grant, which is currently still going over at DOA. GEDA launched the Team Loans Program, and this is, if you think back to the loans program that we discussed a few moments ago, what we did was we allowed for deferred payments. We worked out, as well as any new loans, had an interest-only option for, I want to say 6 months. No, I'm sorry, 1 year. There was also legislation that the governor signed to expand the DeSantis Act, so small businesses were able to get greater abatement on their BPT. And DRT, of course, waived credit card fees and offered payment deferral options. Okay, so now it's 2021. Well, before I do that, I just wanted to go over real quick, really quickly, the grant programs that GEDA did last year in response to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So we did 3 grant programs. The first was $17 million. 2,300 businesses took advantage of this program. And this was a percentage, the award was based on a percentage of your monthly BPT. So if your monthly BPT was $100,000, your award was $25,000. It was 25% of your average monthly, not 25% of your annual average, of your average monthly, okay? We gave, there was a special healthcare system stabilization grant for 1.5 under the, of course, all under the supervision of the Office of the Governor and at her direction. And a small business rent assistance grant, a total award of $3 million. We have approved and funded 400 businesses, and we have about 200 businesses still in the pipeline waiting to be funded. And we're looking towards, the governor is very much looking to fund that with the new ARP round of funding. So now what is the collective response for 2021? Next slide, please. So for 2021, let's see, for 2021, of course, we continue to have the federal programs, EIDL, PPP, I call it EIDL and PPP 2.0. You also have the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, which almost every restaurant I know applied for. And we haven't really heard any feedback at GEDA. We haven't heard feedback about companies that have actually been awarded any monies under the RRF. We'd certainly be interested to know if any businesses you know have benefited from this. Here in Guam, we applied for a number of different types of grant funding under other agencies, including the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Of course, the lion's share of funding coming to Guam is through the American Rescue Plan. We have expanded, we're looking to expand our SSBCI loan and adding a venture capital component to our SSBCI program. And then we also have some state, small business targeted programs, including our STEP program, the Trade and Export program I mentioned earlier, and our any incubator workforce development programs GEDA itself is sponsoring. Next slide, please, and I'll talk about them to varying degrees. So how do these different programs build the economy? All of our small business grant programs, whether they come out of GEDA or DOL, is all about increasing business resiliency, improving the odds of keeping your doors open. Any type of incubator programming is towards strengthening new industries and diversifying our workforce, promoting entrepreneurship. Any kind of economic diversification efforts is, you know, again, diversifying our workforce and encouraging new industries. SSBCI, new industry, and other small business programs. Again, it's really all about increasing business resiliency, diversifying our workforce, and new industries. That's just the crux of the focus on an ongoing basis, but also, especially going forward, a real magnifying glass on those efforts. So let's see. Let's talk real quick about the Small Business Grant Program. So the Small Business Grant Program has been presented to the Office of the Governor, has not yet been authorized funding. But what we're looking at is businesses have an interruption of at least 15% in 2020. So that means during the pandemic year, you should have had a drop in business of your annual revenue of at least 15%. If you earned $100,000 in 2019, your 2020 revenue should be no higher than $85,000. Okay, that's an example. Okay, business interruption of at least 15%. A business must have a minimum of eligible gross receipts of $10,000 or more based on their annual or annualized BPT filings. This is not for startups. So any pandemic assistance grant program, again, is about resiliency. It's of a business that has its doors open or intends to open its doors back up, not for a business who is looking to start up and utilize grant funding. This is not the right grant for you. Small business size standards are going to count. US SBA has, if you go to the SBA website, you can type in the type of business you have. So let's say you have a car dealership, and it'll share with you, if your annual revenue exceeds this, or your number of employees exceed this, you are or you are not considered a small business. And a business who is licensed to do business in Guam. Ineligible businesses are businesses with eligible gross receipts of less than 10,000. So, you know, the side hustles, selling Herbalife on the side of your normal job may not qualify unless you're making over $10,000. Businesses that were once open and are no longer in operation with no intention to reopen, okay, so you do not maintain an active lease, are not eligible, or proof that you are intending to reopen, okay? Commercial landlords are not eligible. Passive investment holdings, nonprofits, governments or private hospitals, or government hospitals, and anyone who's not, and non-small businesses are not eligible, okay? Currently, we are awaiting authorization on this program. And so at this point in time, we're asking businesses to start getting their paperwork together. So what do we mean by getting your paperwork together? Make sure your business license is up to date. Start getting your GRTs compiled. And if you started last year during the pandemic, don't be discouraged. Because you've been in business for, gosh, a year now, we are more than willing to work with you individually. You don't have the 2019 data, but you do have 2020 data, and we are willing to work with you based on that. Another program under development, and I'm not sure if Marie, if you wanted to touch on that, is under the next slide, is Business para Itautau.
Hi, sorry. No, actually, details are still being worked on, so stay tuned. And but everyone has heard Dave say it's pretty much a wage subsidy. He plans to cover up to $9.25 per hour, and that's per employee. So we're still trying to get the final figure for the actual program itself. Okay, let's stay tuned.
All right. You know, one thing to keep in mind is that GDOL and GEDA are working together with the Office of the Governor to try to figure out how much resources we have to put together for all of these programs. GEDA put in a request for, gosh, almost close to 40 million, and I'm sure that DOL put in a similar sized request. And the governor probably has, even though everyone's saying, oh, she was awarded 600 million, she probably has about $900 million worth of requests in front of her. And so just know that GDOL and GEDA will do our very best to advocate for the small businesses to flow as much money outward to you as possible. But as of press time, as of right now, nothing has yet been authorized. But the governor is very excited about these programs to help small businesses. We just have to find a way to make it fit within a budget that she is comfortable authorizing for all of these programs. So now when it comes to industry-specific initiatives, some of the work that GEDA and other government agencies, and we can go ahead and go to the next slide as we kind of finish off here. Of course, recently in tourism, we've been seeing the promotion of the Airbnb program. This is primarily, all of the tourism initiatives are largely being led, initiated, led, and championed by the Guam Visitors Bureau. So I'm not going to take the credit for that. That is all GVB's work. As far as and the airport, and as far as agriculture, aquaculture, these are some of the governor's selected industries: ag, aqua, Silicon Village, so technology, healthcare, construction. All of the ways that we're encouraging all of this is through the use of our qualifying certificate, use of our grant programs. So when it comes to support for food hubs such as the Farmers Co-op, it's support for nonprofits that strengthen agriculture. When it comes to aquaculture, the governor, of course, is currently starting the Fishermen's Co-op building construction project. We also received a grant from the U.S. Economic Development Administration for permitting and siting studies for a sustainable aquaculture industry. We'd like to promote the growth of a virtual workforce, more e-commerce, and through the and more funding, or basically more promotion of remote workplaces and e-commerce types of businesses. And we're doing this through the governor's economic working group and the technology, the Silicon Village subcommittee, currently being led by Nate Taimanglo. And one of the largest creators of new jobs in the United States is healthcare. And so right here in Guam, we've always been underserved when it comes to the healthcare industry across all occupations, not just doctors, but doctors, nurses, phlebotomists, lab techs, etc. And so increasing the total number of healthcare occupations through boot camps and other workforce development programs like the ones discussed by GDOL. One of the points of discussion I did want to bring up is that Marie and I had a chat about the role of boot camps when it comes to an apprenticeship. A boot camp does not replace an apprenticeship. A boot camp is like a pre-apprenticeship. Similar to the work experience program, a boot camp is a great way to get going in a new industry. And an apprenticeship then takes you deeper to the next level. And so if you're in new business planning, you could get your entry level through the boot camps. We highly encourage it. Work with GCC. GEDA has sponsored a number of boot camps, especially in the healthcare industry at GCC and UOG, the Certified Nursing Assistant, and the CNA program they developed in conjunction with DOL. But when that person comes in, when they start to want to train and specialize in other areas, that's when you can really use the Guam Registered Apprenticeship Program. And the same with construction. You can hire a truck driver out of a boot camp at GCC that may have been sponsored by GEDA. But once they're working for you and they'd like to move on to become a specialist of some kind, then you work with GDOL to establish an apprenticeship for this individual and get the tax credit, the BPT tax credit associated with that, to then decrease the cost of training an individual in this industry. All right, I think that is pretty much it. I think we still have some time for questions. As far as lastly, so how do we measure our success? You know, the success is going to be something, last slide. Success is in the numbers. When we went out, how do we measure our success? Is in the numbers. So oftentimes it's after the fact. When we see how our GDP is doing, GDP that includes BPT filings, construction permits, etc., is our GDP growing? Is employment growing across different industries? So we know right now that the construction industry is growing. We know right now that tourism is down but going to rebound. But across different industries, agriculture, aquaculture, technology, healthcare, we'll know that these programs have been effective. Loan volume and venture capital going out in the next 36 months. Oh, that's what I forgot to talk about, SSBCI VC and applications for QCs. So as we, how do we feel at GEDA? I don't believe we got, in the first 2 years that I was here at GEDA, we received maybe one letter of intent to apply for a QC. In the last 6 months, we received around 4 or 5. And so I think this is a very promising indication of the appetite to invest in our island. Okay, and then to go back real quick, because I forgot to talk about it, SSBCI. The territory of Guam was authorized about $54 million under SSBCI to be distributed in 3 tranches, so 17, 17, 17, something like that, over the next several years in loan volume and venture capital. So we're currently putting together a venture capital funded program wherein a small business would come up with 50%, and then the other 50%, the VC funding, would come through a government subsidized product like the SSBCI. So again, stay tuned, keep in touch with GEDA, keep in touch with GDOL, and of course, reach out to us with any questions on any of these items. So I think there's still time for questions if there are other questions from the audience.
I think, Mel, that as you were going along on your presentation, you were answering the questions that were coming through, and we had some good questions. So we thank everybody, and we thank you very much on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, the Guam Economic Development Authority, and Guam Department of Labor. We really want to thank our speakers today, Mel Mendiola and Marie Lizama, for their time and this valuable information sharing. And again, if there are questions after, if you view this again, please feel free to reach out to all of us, and we'll make sure that we get the questions to the right folks and get you the answers that you need. So on that note, have a wonderful day, everybody, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Adios.
Bye now.
Okay, are we kicked off? Yes.